BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of Astro Psych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin.
Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. Just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we truly begin. The first is that there is a new set of short videos available here on Black Box Online Radio's Shorts page, and these videos are also being uploaded to the Facebook page, which is in the description box of this video, as well as to the Instagram page, BlackBoxNed88. They're usually about 1 minute long, and they are aired as Reels on Facebook and Instagram. Those would be the pages where you would find them. But last week, I was more concentrated on making the Reels. However, this week, I'm going to try my best to put out Ripper Wednesday, as well as the Anything Goes Friday segment. And the Jack the Ripper episodes have been coming out very strongly. I love the requested topic ideas that you guys have put in the comments section down below. And what I'm really hoping is that Ripper Wednesday is going to turn into something like the Zodiac Killer News Report, a Jack the Ripper report, if you will, which would be talking about a lot of different subjects at once. And I mean, because I think we all think like that to a certain extent, that when we're looking at a true crime story, we can see some type of connection to a different idea, and instead of just focusing only on one suspect or on one possible connection to the Zodiac Killer or a connection to Jack the Ripper, looking at how there might be many different possibilities to explore. So I think it's a very good way to organize the material, so please look out for that in the future. And I've told you guys that I've been writing something new about true crime, as well as a little bit about a sequel to the book Killer on a White Horse, but I've also just been putting down my notes about true crime and human behavior into, well, something. I'm not even sure what exactly to do with it yet, but I have assembled a new piece of non-fiction writing, which is some new territory for me. And I would just like to remind everybody that if you would like to help out this channel, you can hit the like button and subscribe. And you can also go over to buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. The final confirmed crime was the murder of Paul Stine on October 11th of 1969. But what happened after the murder of Paul Stine? This is what I was discussing last week, and I even played a video clip from Richard Grinnell's YouTube channel, where he talked about something called the discrepancy that is Presidio Heights. That is the name of the video, and he also discussed this in the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Expert series, which I was also the host of. And what happened with not only the Zodiac, his walking path, and the detectives in question, Donald Falk and Armin Pellicetti? Because someone named Dennis D. more or less wanted to point out that there doesn't actually appear to be any time discrepancy in the timeline. And Richard Grinnell wrote a response saying that if Armin Pellicetti received the all-points bulletin about the Zodiac at 9:55 instead of 9:58, it makes absolutely no difference to the timeline that has been laid out. The key argument in the video that Richard made is that both Armin Pellicetti and Donald Falk received an all-points bulletin at the same time. If they received it at 9:55 and arrived at Jackson and Maple at 9:56 and spotted the Zodiac, then the Zodiac left the cab at 9:53. He therefore arrives at the top of Cherry at 9:54. If the teenagers are pointing out Zodiac at the top of Cherry at 9:54, then this is 1 minute before Pelicetti got the APB. If Pelicetti got the APB at 9:55 and arrived at the crime scene at 9:56, and he is having the Zodiac pointed out to him at 9:56, while the Zodiac is at the top of Cherry, that means that the Zodiac is at the top of Cherry at 9:56, while simultaneously being observed near Jackson and Maple at 9:56 by Donald Falk. Changing the time of the APB makes absolutely no difference to the timeline, and neither does the time people have their watches set. That was a comment that Dennis said about people synchronizing their watches, that might have caused a bit of an explanation. This is purely about elapsed time and distance. If a 100-meter runner sets his watch 1 minute earlier than his competitors, he doesn't automatically win the race, no matter how slow he runs. It's about distance covered in a measurable time that has nothing to do with time on a watch. Armin Pelicetti could have set his watch at 9:55 and Donald Falk at 10 p.m. or vice versa, but it makes no difference. They both got to the APB at the same time and performed the actions that they stated. And if we watch Richard Grinnell's video and adjust all the times off by 3 minutes, the same argument stands. Okay, I mean, I follow what he's saying there, but Armin Pelicetti could not have been at the crime scene for 30 seconds before heading off, because this would be in direct contradiction to not only the police report, but all of his statements in the 2007 documentary. We can choose to ignore this to create an alternative story. However, I chose to create a video based on the testimonies of the two officers spoken in their own words. And there was a response that was composed by Dennis D., who was not deterred by that at all in regards to his statement that there shouldn't be a time discrepancy at Presidio Heights, by saying, "Yes, both Pelicetti and Falk received the APB at the same time. Donald Falk states in the Crime of the Century documentary that he received the APB just north of Washington on Presidio Avenue. He headed north and turned west on Jackson, then turned north on Arguello and on to Pacific. I feel he continued on to Pacific and then turned south on Spruce through the Presidio entrance, turned west on Jackson, and that is where he spotted the Zodiac at 3712 Jackson Street, then turned south. Then turned south on Cherry. Therefore, I believe the critical error you made was assuming that Falk's total driving time from the time of the APB to Cherry, where he met Pelicetti, was 90 seconds. Falk stated in This is the Zodiac Speaking that he headed west on Jackson, then turned south on Cherry to meet Pelicetti, but this was not the direct route from the APB. He had already went to Pacific. I believe that he turned south through the entrance at Spruce, then, as he stated, west on Jackson, then south on Cherry to meet Pelicetti. So again, there is no mystery. There is no major time discrepancy. The Zodiac was not in two places at once, and everything makes sense timeline-wise. I believe Pelicetti simply misspoke in the documentary when he said that the APB was at 9:55. I cannot account for Falk stating that he received the update near Arguello and from Pelicetti on Cherry. I also cannot understand why Falk stated that he had seen the suspect heading north on Maple, but also stated that he was at 3712 Jackson Street, walking along a path to a set of stairs. Alright, thank you to both of these guys for weighing in about what the Zodiac Killer and the detectives did after the Presidio Heights shooting. My take on the subject is, Dennis may have made a good observation about how it did not take Donald Falk 90 seconds to do all of these things after the APB that he's actually starting. There's actually more time involved there than what it seems, because this is the one that stands out to most of me, this line here that says that Falk's total driving time from the time of the APB to Cherry, where he met Pelicetti, was 90 seconds. That's the critical error. Falk stated, and this is the Zodiac Speaking, that he was heading west on Jackson, then turned south on Cherry to meet Pelicetti, but that was not the direct route. He had already went to Pacific, so that there's actually there isn't this need to have someone going all over. So the long and short of it is, that was not the direct route. And I would like to give a shout-out to Drew Gray, who sent this into the email address, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. Anybody can write the show there. And Drew is part of the Citizen Detective podcast team. He works with the technical productions over there. Their episodes are available here on YouTube, and it also features Mike Morford of ZodiacKiller.net. But he was talking to me about a suspect in the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. Now, some people believe that the first Zodiac crime took place on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders, and other people believe that it actually took place on October 30th of 1966 with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California. And Drew Gray just shared the info about William Suff as a possible suspect in the Bates murder. Now, this would not be a Zodiac killer connection, because I'm going to get right to the heart of the issue. William Suff is a suspect that we can discuss and we can evaluate in regards to the Bates murder, but there's a big reason why he couldn't be the Zodiac. But the reasons why he should be thought of as a suspect in the murder of Sherry Jo Bates is that, number one, he was a real serial killer. He was called the Riverside Killer. I mean, this was his area of operation. And after the Bates murder, there was the Riverside Confession, a letter that was mailed in November of 1966, where the killer talked about how he was going to murder women in the future, and he was going to cut off their lady parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. Those were the actions and activities of the serial killer William Suff, who was known as the Riverside Killer as well as the Lake Elsinore Killer. He murdered women. He murdered them by knife. Sherry Jo Bates was murdered by knife. And he also cut off their breasts, cutting off their lady parts. And a very particular detail that is mentioned about him in the documentaries is that he would pose the bodies of the women in a way so that they were being mocked, or he's letting the authorities know that he is the person committing this crime. It's just adding insult to injury, and that was viewed as a type of taunt in its own right. But a big thing that really, really surprised me when I began looking into the case of William Suff is that he did not truly begin his serial killer reign of terror until the mid to late 1980s. I was like, well, goodness, like, what on earth is going on with this guy's timeline? Okay, so, in 1966, yes, he's in Southern California, and then he ultimately gets married, and then he moves to Texas, actually, in 1969 because of the military, and there's a very long story involving, the child that his partner had from a previous relationship, but that's not the main focus. What a bigger focus is that in 1974, he murdered his own daughter, a 2-month-old, I repeat, he started punching his newborn baby, again, just 2 months old, and she actually died from liver damage. And he was sent to prison, and he served 10 months of that sentence. And then he was let out, and that's when his serial killer reign of terror truly began. And while I was looking at videos online about William Suff, I saw that there was a presentation from Ken Mains of Unsolved No More, and Ken Mains, of course, was on the History Channel's The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer. I was going to do a bigger episode today about Ken Mains, or just include more of his material in a different way for this Zodiac Monday, because he did an episode about the Zodiac Killer suspect Edward Wayne Edwards, but not focusing purely on the Zodiac connection. He was talking about Edward Wayne Edwards as a Black Dahlia suspect, and I guess we can encapsulate that in one sentence. No, it wasn't him. All right, Ken Mains and I are in agreement on that. But as far as William Suff, he was actually doing something where he is interviewing a different death row inmate named William Nagaro, and that guy actually had his sentence commuted from death to life imprisonment about a month and a half ago, but he has another video on that. But he was talking to a guy who works with other death row inmates in San Quentin Prison, where William Suff was serving, someone who knew him personally, who has interacted with him, and has also confirmed a lot of the statements that are being shared in these documentaries. One more time, William Suff was the Lake Elsinore Killer, also known as the Riverside Killer. And what he said was that William Suff was convicted for the murder of his daughter. He did serve 10 years for it, but what he believed was, after knowing the guy personally, was that during those 10 years, he was contemplating how to become a serial killer, that he believed that William Suff was someone who was born to kill. And in that particular video, this guy William Nagaro is saying over and over again, some people are just born to kill. They have a killer instinct. And that's not meant to be some type of weird, twisted, cliched statement. It's something that I haven't truly explored that much here on Black Box Online Radio, and that is that perhaps some people are just born with destructive tendencies. They actually have some type of urge from birth that is going to drive them to kill, because what William Noguera was saying about William Suff is that, all right, he had a very bad relationship with his mother growing up. You could even call it an abusive relationship with his mother, and he goes on to become a serial killer who is targeting women, cutting off their female parts and depositing them for the city to see. But that is not the reason why he became a killer. Bill Noguera wanted to be very clear about this, that he believed that William Suff went on to become a serial killer because he was born that way. And he said that no matter what, this guy would have gone on to have become a killer. If he had started working at the postal office or something like David Berkowitz, and then he would have just gone after postal employees, something would have pushed him the wrong way. Something would have pushed him toward a life of violence. He just had that in his system. And it's not being very, very clear, but I think perhaps he means something more along the lines of neurological functioning, impulse control, and something that is very important to examine when it comes to serial killers, and that is that psychopaths and sociopaths are very manipulative. And this was mentioned so much by Bill Noguera, saying that William Suff was a performer. He would put on the facade. He's trying to make people think a certain way. There's just this instinctive desire to manipulate with psychopaths and sociopaths. They want people to be fooled because it's just something else that they have control over. And when you can actually, and the story that he shared was that sometimes he would be able to cut through William Suff's manipulations, or he'd be able to call him out on how that's a lie or something, and he would just erupt in rage. And that does not only happen with serial killers, because when I did the episode for the Anything Goes Friday segment talking about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine shooters, they had the exact same stories about Eric Harris. The people who knew him prior to the shooting stated that when you could cut through his manipulations, he would just turn red in the face and erupt in rage. He would be exposed and vulnerable, and it's just going back to being a scared little child who is trying to develop some type of fake facade to try and deal with the troubles of life. And again, but so many people deal with the troubles of life and they don't go on to become murderers. So maybe this guy Bill Noguera actually has a few points when he's talking about how there is a type of instinct in some people to commit homicide, and that's very, very saddening. What would be some strikes against this guy being the murder of Cheri Jo Bates? Well, I've shared with you 2 serial killer nicknames from William Suff. He was the Riverside Killer and the Lake Elsinore Killer, but another nickname was he was the Riverside Prostitute Killer, and Cheri Jo Bates was absolutely not a prostitute. I mean, and also, he is not going after someone who was working a job that he would have found to have been degrading or any particular way. There has to be some type of theory being formulated that this was an early crime of a budding serial killer where the victim was not closely examined, or that he hadn't completely developed his victim profile. It was a time perhaps when he took the crime too far, and maybe he knew Cheri Jo Bates and he wanted to be close to her. He had some type of infatuation with her, and it just erupted into some type of argument and altercation, and he murdered her. I mean, you'd have to deal with some type of imaginary mental timeline to deal with that, so that's a strike against it. But a point in favor of William Suff being a suspect in the Cheri Jo Bates murder is that he was charged with 13 murders. I mean, it's 12 plus his daughter. But during the interviews with Bill Noguera, he stated that William Suff has confessed to more crimes, and that he may have murdered as many as 32 people in Riverside, California. But one point, though, that I always have to bring up is sometimes people confess to crimes that they did not do. Sometimes people exaggerate their body counts and misrepresent their serial killer body counts when they're in prison. And the reason why they do this is because they are bored, they're just doing things to get attention. Henry Lee Lucas would be a very good example of this. Some people even call him the confession killer, confessing to thousands of crimes. And also, it goes back to that psychopathic and sociopathic desire to manipulate, to be in control, and to just establish complete mastery of the narrative. But I'm really leaning toward William Suff not being the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates. I mean, there are so many points in favor of his guilt, but here is a one where you can just interpret this on your own. He would have been 16 years old at the time of the Bates murder, and I mean, it's possible, it's definitely possible, that he's some guy who commits the Bates murder, and then he's just kind of brewing with the emotions for a while, then he meets his future wife, and then they get married and stationed in the military in Texas in 1969, in the event with his daughter in 1974, and, I mean, yes, okay, I can comprehend that, but overall, my gut instincts are telling me that this is not the guy, and this is just another unrelated serial killer. And in the next segment here, I would like to talk about a website called ZodiacErrors.com. This was shared in one of the Zodiac Killer Facebook groups, and someone has gone through the websites of other zodiologists, and they've looked at possible errors that could have been made on the part of certain researchers, and they do have a page for that by name, addressing people such as Tom Voigt, Michael Butterfield, and Richard Grinnell. But I would like to focus on a very specific one because it's not exactly calling out any of those guys. It instead points to a particular theory in the Zodiac Killer mystery in relation to the Zodiac Killer's final victim, Paul Stine, whom we've discussed previously, and that states that there's this theory that Paul Stine faked his own death, and that he found a man who looked somewhat like him, he murdered him, and then he is wiping down the taxi cab, and that's actually Paul Stine in the composite sketch, that Paul Stine was indeed the Zodiac Killer. He committed the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and murdered some look-alike guy, and then disappeared. And that guy is pointing out that whoever runs ZodiacErrors.com, I'm not sure whose website it is, maybe it's anonymous, but they're pointing out that Paul Stine's fingerprints were examined and that most likely he's not the source of the whatever's been left behind, the evidence that has been left behind. And I just think that that's a far-out story. And the reason why I'm sharing that with you is not to give any credibility to that theory that Paul Stine was the Zodiac Killer and he faked his own death. No. It is because I wanted to share that theory has been introduced into the Jack the Ripper case in the exact same way that Jack the Ripper's final victim, Mary Kelly, was Jack the Ripper. It's one of the Jill the Ripper theories, and I have an episode about this on Black Box Online Radio where I talk about the various Jill the Ripper theories. Now, some of them are actually presented in a very clear and cogent manner, talking about how Jack the Ripper could have been a midwife, and that's the only type of person who could have been walking up and down the streets during the hours of darkness with all the blood on her clothing, and no one would have ever been suspicious. But the idea that Mary Kelly was Jack the Ripper, that she committed the first 4 murders, the murders of Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman and Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes, and then murdered a look-alike and faked her own death. I mean, it's an almost identical theory. And since I've been doing the episodes about Jack the Ripper here on Black Box Online Radio, I've noticed that there are so many theories that are just almost identical. You pull out the word Zodiac, and you insert the name Jack, and then it works in both ways. And I am led to believe that these are just psychological markers in people's personality traits. Like, people are projecting their own personalities onto these true crime cases, and that's why they're coming up with these ridiculous theories that Paul Stine was the Zodiac Killer, Mary Kelly was Jack the Ripper, Mary Kelly, who, the real Mary Kelly, was actually the victim of one of the most vicious and brutal murders in the entire history of the planet Earth. And, I mean, I don't think there's an ounce of value in highlighting anything more. But also, these are unsolved cases, and perhaps 2 different people have had the same thought or the same idea, the same possibility has come to mind more than once. I would like to move on to the next segment, and I'm giving a shout-out to Batman66, who sent this in to the Facebook page. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and on Facebook I am also releasing the YouTube shorts. Like, you can watch the shorts on Facebook as Reels, you can watch them here on YouTube, as well as on the Instagram page. They're uploaded in 3 different places, so you feel free to follow BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram, or just my personal Facebook from the description box. And Batman66 sent me an article about a rather similar murder to the murder of Paul Stine, although Paul Stine was a taxi driver, and we're going to discuss the murder of Stuart E. Marr, who was a tax expert. And he sent me an article from the San Francisco Examiner, March of 1968. This is called The Bizarre Killing of Tax Expert on Nob Hill. A man who waddled like a duck was being sought in a bizarre Nob Hill execution-style murder. The victim was Stuart E. Marr, 48 years old, a chief tax consultant for the Western Pacific Railroad, who lived at 1850 Clay Street. He never glimpsed at his assailant, who approached him from behind and placed a small-caliber pistol to the back of his ear and fired. Marr, whose home was only a few blocks away, crumbled to the sidewalks at Pine and Taylor Streets. He died at Mission Emergency Hospital less than an hour after the shooting. Inspector Jack Cleary said the strange slaying was witnessed by John F. Winters, age 20, a magazine writer from Columbus, Ohio, who was staying in a hotel at the vicinity. Winters told the inspector that Marr was walking along Pine when he had halted for a stop at a light at Taylor. The attacker, who had been on the opposite corner, quickly crossed the street, walked up behind Marr, and fired. Then he ran, his gait causing Winters to compare him to a duck. He was dressed in dark clothes and appeared to be between 30 and 40 years old. Police searched Marr's neat three-room apartment but found no reason why anyone would kill him. The quarters were described as extremely neat and well-furnished, and their occupant was known to be quiet and immaculate. Marr had a brother in the East, but his parents are dead. And I'm just going to stop the article right there one more time. That was from the San Francisco Examiner in March of 1968. So, as you see, this is a crime that took place prior to the Zodiac Killer's announcement of his name in the summer of 1969. But what's important to note from this article is, number one, when you look at a photo of Stuart E. Marr, he looks like the Zodiac Killer. Does that not show you how useless the Zodiac Killer composite sketch is after the Stine shooting? Half the people, age-appropriate, in San Francisco looked like that composite sketch back in 1969. So, short hair, dark-rimmed glasses. Okay, and no, I don't think Stuart Marr faked his own death, and then he went on to become the Zodiac Killer. But the second thing is that the murderer waddled like a duck as he walked. And some of you guys will already know this, but the Zodiac Killer was reported to have had somewhat of a shuffling walk. Duck-like or shuffling, could that actually be a connection? And believe it or not, I'm actually going to entertain that possibility. The only thing that bothers me is that why wouldn't the Zodiac Killer just admit to that in his first letter that he murdered Stuart Marr? This is, if he's going to talk about the Lake Herman Road murders, which took place in December of 1968, why not just admit to committing the murder of Stuart Marr, which happened in the months before that? I don't know, and we simply do not have all the answers. Some people think that the Zodiac murdered an enormous amount of people prior to the Lake Herman Road murders. We're talking about Ray Davis, the Domingos Edwards murders, the Swindles, Sherry Jo Bates, maybe even Stuart Marr. But the way that he's walking, that is definitely some cause for concern. But also, there is this thing about how Stuart Marr worked for the Western Pacific Railroad, and you'll know that there is a Zodiac Killer suspect who has a railroad connection, and a rather strong one, and his name is John Parr Cox. He's a suspect that somebody named Adam has brought forward recently, and he's gone through a lot of records at the University of California at Berkeley. He's also obtained documents from John Parr Cox's work with the railroad agency, the Santa Fe Railroad, actually. And is there some type of connection going on? But no matter what, Zodiac related or not, when you hear that story about Stuart Marr, and that he was killed execution style, some guy just crossed the street, pulled a gun, and shot him in the side of the head, by the right side of the head, by his ear, does that not sound like he was specifically targeted? And with the Zodiac case, this is perhaps a more legitimate way of discussing the murder of Paul Stine. Some people think that the Zodiac looked a lot like Paul Stine, and that he murdered someone who looked like him because of some act of self-hatred. And in an unsolved case, a possibility like that should not be discounted too quickly. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shout-outs. The first one comes to us from Batman66, who sent this in to the Super Thanks on YouTube, actually, using the Super Thanks on YouTube. That's another way that you can contribute to the show. And the other way is to go over to buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnet88. There's a link to that in the description box. And the second one comes to us from Classic Chevy Cat, who wrote this message out saying, "Hi Ned, thanks again for inspiring me to finish my book. I'm waiting for the proof. Nervous stomach, as this has been a long-time dream." Oh, well, you're welcome, Classic Chevy Cat. And as I understand, the title of your book is Level 22, but that is the working title. I'm not sure if you've chosen a new one yet. But yes, Classic Chevy Cat had written a novel that was inspired by the Zodiac Killer mystery, and we are all eagerly awaiting an update on that. And when it says a proof here, I think that just means proofreading. I'm waiting for the proof. I think that just means proofreading as opposed to actually, like, some type of proof in the Zodiac Killer mystery. But, and one more time, I look forward to reading your book once it's out. And there are two possible inspirations for the Zodiac Killer symbol that I will discuss in this episode here, and both of them relate back to music. First, I would like to give a shout-out to Batman66, who sent something to me about Arthur Sullivan's grave. Now, the Zodiac Killer was almost certainly a fan of Gilbert and Sullivan, who were behind the operetta The Mikado, and the Zodiac is talking about all other kinds of things, from books and comic books and movies. It seems like this person is doing a lot of introverted things, but the symbol on Arthur Sullivan's grave is a cross. Of course, not perhaps meant to be an astrological zodiac sign. Instead, it is a cross with a circle, and the cross goes through the center of it, which is used, from time to time in burials as well as on certain churches in Christianity. But another symbol was sent to me from Jay, who sent this into the Facebook page for Black Box Online Radio. Not only is there my personal Facebook page in the description box, but there's also a Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, which I don't use too much. It's better to get in touch with me on my personal page. And it says, "I always had a nagging feeling about the zodiac symbol, but couldn't put my finger on it. I'm a professional musician, and this is a symbol called a coda in music notation. Check it out." And it says, "At this point, the performer should jump to the point in the music where the word coda or second coda symbol is written. The coda, literally translated as the tail, it is an ending section that composers sometimes write, and it is played to finish off a piece of music." I mean, both of these, I think, are very strong connections to the Zodiac Killer mystery, and they're talking about things that the Zodiac would have been familiar with. I mean, to a certain extent, the Zodiac's familiar with music. We haven't seen things extremely strongly that the Zodiac Killer was a musician himself or could even read music notation, but he definitely makes references to the Mikado, and not to mention this whole concept of finishing off a piece of music. Some people think that that's the entire mindset of the Zodiac Killer, that he wanted to commit the crimes in the tradition of an operetta or a musical, or it was all just a performance to him, but good observations from you guys. And now to get into the true crime talk territory, I'm going to play a clip from the Howard Stern show, and this is allegedly when a serial killer called into his program, and this is from years ago. I just happened to catch the clip on YouTube in a related video, like a suggested video from the YouTube algorithm, and I'm going to play a clip, and I would like to have a discussion about this. And yes, we'll be doing a little bit of comparisons, like comparing and contrasting to the Zodiac Killer mystery, but also I want you guys to think about what you're hearing in this audio clip, and then let's have a response.
All right, I got a guy on the phone who claims he's been killing prostitutes, and he's wondering why he's doing it.
Oh, God.
So maybe he thinks I have an answer. Is this Ed? Ed?
No, this isn't Ed.
Oh.
You haven't killed any prostitutes?
No, I never said my name was Ed.
Oh.
Sorry.
That's okay.
What name do you use?
You can call me Clay.
Clay?
Clay?
Yes, Clay. Okay, Clay. So what happened? How many prostitutes have you killed?
12.
And you're wondering why you do it?
I have a pretty good idea.
Why? Did your mom beat you? Did your mom spank you?
Was your mom a prostitute?
No. Actually, nothing like that.
What is it then?
I think I just do it for the sense of the power.
All right. Do you have sex with them first?
Yes, and
then what, you strangle them?
once.
How else did you kill them?
Well, a few times, actually most times with a hammer.
And where do you do this primarily?
I've done it twice in a parking garage, and then the rest of the times on the side of the road.
And you're from the New Orleans area?
Yes.
Hmm.
And how? I mean, what do you beat them to death with a hammer?
Man.
That usually only takes once, and
Dude, you got to have a lot of anger in you.
yes.
And that means you're heartless. Did you used to kill small animals?
No, I've killed a rat.
Yeah. Dude, you're a serial killer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And you get away with it, I guess, because they're hookers, and so far nobody's...
Howard?
What?
Is this Howard?
Yeah. Hello? Hello?
I didn't know this was Howard.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
Howard.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've never killed a kitten.
So how old were you when you killed your first woman?
16.
And you must be a powerful kind of guy, big guy.
I wasn't then.
Right. And when you killed your first one, did you go in there knowing you were going to kill her, or it just sort of happened?
I knew I really had it planned out.
Hmm.
You know, I wanted to do the whole sending clues.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Are you
wanted
in?
to baffle people, but it turned out no one noticed for a long time.
Right. Like you killed her on the side of the road?
Her, that was the parking garage.
Okay. And then what'd you do with the body? You dumped that somewhere?
Yeah, actually, I think she's probably one of the ones that they found.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something. You were sending clues that you were going to do this?
No, I was.
He was going to like
doing that.
He was going to leave like a note for the newspapers, and
But you decided not to.
he didn't want to be famous or draw attention to himself. But the problem is,
No, that's what I wanted to do. But
but you did, but no one noticed the clues.
I never sent the clues. I never left anything. You know, I wanted to have my own little signature.
Right.
I wanted to thumb paint
Oh,
with their thumbs.
Oh, really?
what do you want to do?
Thumb paint with their thumbs.
Thumb paint what though?
I don't know.
Oh, anything. It was in a comic book a couple of years ago. Just seemed like a good idea.
Like you take the girl you killed, you dip her thumbs in paint, and then you do like a thumb painting
Yes.
on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
Now, after you kill somebody, do you play with the body?
Actually, the closest I've ever done to that is I always make sure I pay them and I make sure they keep their money
Oh, really?
when they're still alive. But with one of them, I did put the money in a compromising place.
I see.
But that was this one. You know, it had a penis.
Oh, really?
It was a guy.
Yeah, I didn't know at first.
So do you ever get? Do you think the reason you're so angry is because you were abused or something?
No, I wasn't abused, Howard.
Where's your family?
You got a wife?
I mean, you got a mom, a dad, a wife, children. You got any of that?
I've got a couple of kids, but I'm
No wife.
not married to the mother.
You're a white guy?
Yeah, Howard, that's pretty funny because the only suspect they had when they started finding the bodies was a black police officer.
Oh.
Turns out one of them was associated with them.
Oh, really?
Are you on drugs?
I've done acid a few times.
So
But nothing heavy.
So after you killed the first 16-year-old, like you finished.
No, I was 16.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
She was.
All right. So you finished with your sexual gratification, and then you
Not always, no.
not always. You don't even want to get laid sometimes.
No,
You just want to kill.
I'm just bored.
Right.
But does the killing sexually satisfy you in some way?
I can't believe Ed McMahon's not laughing.
I've eaten off thinking about it later.
Yeah.
What do you say?
That's about it.
He's pleasured himself thinking about it later.
Oh, he has. Okay. Now, how far apart are these murders? Like, do you murder and then, like, you feel satisfied for a while?
I don't even understand why I do it, Howard. I don't know if I ever get any satisfaction.
But how
the
often?
closest together anywhere was the same night.
Really?
You killed two people in the same night?
Yeah, but I went to Mississippi for the second one.
So there's no pattern to how many weeks or days between murders?
No.
Are these mostly white chicks or black chicks?
A fair number of them have been black. The transvestite was black.
You think there's some racial motivation here?
No, Howard. They were just, let's just say, a Jimmy Swaggart town.
Jimmy Swaggart town.
Don't know what that means.
Me neither, but
That's pretty much the area around here where the prostitutes all hang out.
I see.
And it's just whoever comes up to you. You don't pick a certain type?
I don't even approach them. I wait for them to approach me, Robin.
So
do you
that's
ever,
like them asking for it.
do you ever, like, look into their eyes and go, you know, gee, these people were just children at one point, and maybe they just had a tough life?
I've let a couple go.
You have? Like, what happened? You're in the middle of killing them, and then they what do they say? Why would you let one go and kill the other?
There was this one.
Go ahead.
I think she was probably really new to it.
Yeah.
There was just something about her. Maybe she reminded me of my ex-fiance, but...
Right. You somehow relate...
More of an innocent quality.
You somehow felt bad for her.
Yeah.
So you killed your first woman.
When was the last time you killed?
It's been a few months.
Right.
Actually, it's been going on a year.
So what do you think you're going to do? Do you think you're going to kill yourself? Do you think that
Are you going to kill again?
Can you stop
If
this?
I killed myself, I'd miss the next Batman movie.
Right. You don't want to do that.
Okay, and that was somebody claiming that he was a serial killer calling into the Howard Stern show. My first immediate question for you is, do you believe that that was real, or do you think that that was a prank call? Because the reason why I wanted to share this with you guys on Black Box Online Radio was, I was reading through the comments on that video that had been uploaded on YouTube, and people were having a lot of debate about this, saying that there's no way somebody could fabricate a story like that and just give such clear responses off the top of his head. I mean, he had to have been telling the truth, either that or he's the best liar in the world. Well, one thing that I have learned going through many different true crime cases here on BBOR is, yes, some people are really good liars, and that could very well be what's happening, that this guy is very quick thinking. But I don't have the exact comment in front of me, or else I would give that person a shout-out, but someone else wrote in saying, now wait a second, you don't have to make up responses off the top of your head when you're doing a prank call to a radio show. It's called preparing your story. I mean, they don't know what that guy's doing. Maybe he wrote down a list of items that he was going to say, like part of his fake story, and he had little cheat notes, or maybe he just practiced it over and over again. That's most likely what would happen when you think about somebody doing a prank call. They spend the day organizing it in their head, and they're like, oh, I'm going to say this, and this is my cover story. And then it also ties into something that's called a 3-point work. They do this in performances, even in wrestling sometimes. There are just 3 major points that have to be remembered. Okay, well, I'm going to say that I'm a serial killer. I'm going to say that I committed crimes with a hammer. I committed my first crime when I was 16. And then he's just going to make up anything other than that. There are 3 key elements to the performance that have to be used. But one thing that was shared in the comment section was there is a real serial killer from Louisiana that seems to match the description of what's been shared in that audio clip. And this person is called the Storyville Slayer. And I would like to just go through a list of basic facts that have been shared on Wikipedia about the Storyville Slayer. And firstly, this seems like a very vicious serial killer. I mean, the Zodiac Killer murdered 5 people and possibly committed other crimes, but 5 confirmed kills. The Storyville Slayer has 24 plus murders attributed to him. The Storyville Slayer is the nickname given to an American serial killer who murdered at least 24 women, and most of them drug addicts, and in the New Orleans area. Through the course of the investigation, 2 separate suspects were considered, one of whom was convicted of 1 murder, leading investigators to believe that multiple killers are responsible. Well, this, I mean, we've been through this so many times in the Zodiac mystery. It seems like there are multiple killers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there are. There could be so many, explanations, not to mention the contaminations of evidence. But here are some points, though. I mean, I'm going to be very, very blunt with you guys. I'm going to get straight to the heart of the issue. The person in that audio clip was almost certainly not the Storyville Slayer, because that person admitted to committing a murder by strangulation one time, and the primary motive of the Storyville Slayer, or not motive, the primary method of killing was by strangulation, not just one time. And also, the Storyville Slayer doesn't appear to have primarily killed by hammer, the way that that was described in the audio clip there. But I'll read this right here from Wikipedia. The perpetrator mainly targeted girls and women of African American descent between the ages of 17 and 42 years old. Most of them were strangled to death. Others were beaten and drowned in canals and rivers and then dumped in swamps, rivers or canals near highways bordering the western shores of Lake Pontchartrain. And, I mean, if strangulation is the primary form of killing that this person's doing, they wouldn't have said they had only done it one time, unless you're entertaining some very bizarre and twisted multiple killers hypothesis, and the authorities did say that, though. But it also says that some of the victims have never been identified, and there is a section here, though, that does talk about the call to the Howard Stern show, and they look at one of the prime suspects in the case named Russell Elwood. On August 13th of 1997, the Howard Stern show received a call from a man who identified himself as Clay. During the conversation with host Howard Stern, which was broadcast live, Clay described the details for more than 12 murders and gave some details about his background, indicating that he was a white resident of New Orleans. The interview with the potential serial killer caused a massive media publicity, thanks to which the FBI agents allegedly went to the studio and seized the audio recordings of the call to establish the caller's location and possible identity. In the following years, the credibility of this incident was questioned, as the program regularly received numerous calls from people who claimed to have done terrible things, with some alleging that Stern himself faked the call to boost ratings. I am someone who is forced to admit I don't necessarily know when radio shows fake things to get ratings. I mean, sometimes people say that all of those high-profile radio hosts, like when Rush Limbaugh was on the air, other radio hosts like Michael Savage and Mark Levin, that they all just used fake paid actors for their phone calls, that it was all just a setup, and perhaps it's similar to that three-point work that I was talking about, where there's a lot of improvisation, but there are points that a person has to remember, like in regards to their political orientation and such. Some people insist that it's all fake, other people insist that it's all real, and with the Stern audience, yes, they say the same stuff. You can read through the comments and even see old forum posts when people are talking about, oh yeah, that guy's absolutely going along with it. It's all just a setup. They are all just orchestrated this together. But one point it is important to remember is that the Stern show also regularly shares prank phone calls, which they call phony phone calls, which are mostly done by Sal Governale and Richard Christie, and in the new millennium, so to speak. I mean, when did Sal first start doing that stuff? Was it 1996 or something? But then he joined the show in the new millennium, and then Richard Christie was also on there around the same time. But, I mean, I digress from that. The important point is, this person is telling a really fishy story. This person named Clay pretending to be a serial killer. Number one, stating that there was no real form of abuse in his life. A serial killer who targets females, and almost exclusively females, will almost always have some type of story of abuse. I mean, I suppose anything's possible, but very, very rarely would you experience something like that. And I think the only possible explanation could be that somebody had this very odd infatuation with morbidity. Because when I was talking about Ted Bundy recently for the Anything Goes Friday segment, one of the psychologists in a documentary was saying that exposure to morbidity at a young age is a very big influence of someone's destructive behavior that can escalate to the form of serial killing. And you see this with other serial killers, such as Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. They believe that was also a very big influence on him. Jeffrey Dahmer, how about him? Especially with Jeffrey Dahmer, it's not only dealing with people, it's also dealing with weird experiments on animals in a shed, and so many things are tying into morbidity. But I go back to James H. Fallon in the book The Psychopath Inside all the time. James H. Fallon is a neuroscientist who proposed that there are three major things that drive people to become serial killers. One is genetics, something in the genes. Number two is neurological functioning, like the way that their brain is actually sending neurotransmitters. And the third is child abuse. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you guys over and over again is the point that he wanted to make is he believed that child abuse was overwhelmingly the most influential thing on someone to make them into a serial killer. That was the biggest point. And you see this all the time. Like, as soon as we learn about a mass shooter or we learn about a new serial killer, you find that there are these stories of abuse from their past. And the other reason why I always share that story with you guys about James H. Fallon is because he is someone who went on to write the book The Psychopath Inside because he did brain scans of himself as a neuroscientist, and he was shocked to find out that he has the genetic material of a serial killer. He has the neurological functioning of a serial killer. His brain is more or less wired up the way a serial killer's would, but he said very clearly he was not abused. He was not overly physically abused as a child, or there was no form of sexual abuse in his past, and that is the reason why he believes that he did not go on to become a serial killer. And I mean, I think that serial killers are much more common than I thought about as a kid. I mean, I really had no idea there were so many serial killers out there. But we also have to remember that just because somebody has been through forms of child abuse, as well as having these genetic issues or these brain functioning issues, that does not make them a killer. They're not just programmed to kill. Some people are, but I think it's a very small percentage of the population, and I don't have an exact number on that. And as I said, these serial killer stories happen very frequently. I mean, I hadn't heard of William Suff, the Riverside Killer, until a couple weeks ago, and I'm learning about all new types of serial killers. How about the Storyville Slayer? I hadn't heard of the Storyville Slayer until recently either. There are more serial killers in the world than I had originally thought, but I still think that the average person, and sometimes even the below average person, isn't going to go on and become a serial killer just because they've been through these types of traumatic events. So, those are just the points that I would like to share and keep in mind. But the final thing, though, the final note is that I still have to make the ultimate verdict that I think that was a prank call. Now, was Howard Stern involved with that? No comment. Absolutely no idea. I don't know what goes on in their meetings back in 1997 and so on. But I think that was a prank call. I mean, the person has this very odd story about no abuse, not to mention that the details are very vague and not extremely specific. And also, it seems like someone who was a little bit familiar with the Storyville Slayer case from Louisiana, but not overly familiar. That's why they misrepresented the details about strangulation and said made it appear that there were more blunt force trauma victims than there were. Purely my take on the subject. What do you think? You can put your idea in the comment section down below, and I would love to read your responses to anything that has been discussed in this episode. Maybe your comments will be worked into a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. And anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.